"Babe, I'm home," Bill announced, his laughter echoing off the marble floors as he pulled Marlene, stunning in her emerald green dress, into the foyer like a trophy he had finally claimed. But the echo was wrong. The silence hit him first, heavy and cold. Then the bare walls where the art used to hang. Then the only thing left in the master suite, a single red envelope resting on the bare mattress. And when he tore open that letter, the arrogance drained from his face. Because Peggy didn't just leave him, she left him a trap waiting in that house that was about to incinerate his career, drain his bank accounts, and strip him of his freedom. Please sit back and relax as we dive fully into this satisfying story of a wife who stopped playing the victim and started playing the game. If you're ready for some serious karma, hit like and tell me where you're watching from and the time. The manila envelope sat on the pristine white marble of the kitchen island, looking violently out of place amidst the manicured perfection of Peggy's life. It was thick, heavy, and sealed with a strip of tape that seems to dare her to peel it back. Peggy stood before it, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned the color of bone. For weeks, the silence in the house had felt different. Not peaceful, but pregnant with secrets. The late-night texts Bill shielded with his shoulder, the emergency board meetings in Aspen that required new luggage, the way he looked at her with a glazed, polite detachment that was crueler than hatred. She had hired the private investigator, a man named Miller who smelled of stale coffee and cynicism, exactly 10 days ago. He had promised clarity. Now, clarity was sitting right in front of her, costing $5,000 and her peace of mind. With a breath that shuddered in her chest, Peggy reached out and tore the seal. She slid the contents onto the marble. Photographs fanned out like a deck of poisoned cards. The first one was innocuous enough, Bill walking through the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, his hand on the small of a woman's back. But the second one stole the air from the room. It was Bill, her husband of 20 years, throwing his head back in laughter, a look of unburdened joy she hadn't seen on his face in a decade. And clinging to his arm was Marlene. Peggy knew who she was immediately. Marlene was the new junior VP of marketing at Bill's firm, a woman 20 years younger with eyes that looked like they calculated the net worth of everything they touched. Peggy forced herself to look at every single image. Bill and Marlene by a pool in Miami. Bill buying Marlene a diamond bracelet, one Peggy recognized from a credit card statement he had claimed was a client gift. Bill kissing Marlene's neck in a dimly lit steakhouse. The betrayal wasn't just in the intimacy, it was in the casualness of it. He wasn't hiding it from the world, only from her. He had humiliated her, parading this affair around the corporate circuits where everyone knew Peggy, the loyal wife who hosted the charity galas and managed the estate. She felt a hot, acidic wave of nausea climb her throat. Her eyes burned, the tears pricking at the corners, threatening to spill over and reduce her to the weeping, broken woman Bill likely expected her to be when he finally decided to discard her. She pulled a chair out and sat down heavily, the silence of the large, empty house pressing in on her. She reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes, but then her hand stopped. Her gaze drifted from the photos to the stock of mail she had sorted earlier that morning. On top was a legal document from Bill's firm, something he had tossed on her desk weeks ago with a dismissive wave. "Sign this, Peg," he had said, barely looking up from his phone. "It's just the updated power of attorney. Since I'm traveling so much for the merger, I need you to handle the real estate portfolio and the joint accounts without nagging me for signatures every 5 minutes." She had signed it. She always signed it. She was the perfect corporate wife, the efficient manager of his domestic empire. He trusted her completely, not because he loved her, she realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity, but because he thought she was stupid. He thought she was a fixture, as permanent and silent as the marble counter. He believed she was so blindly devoted that he could hand her the weapon that would kill him and she would simply polish it and put it in a drawer. Peggy looked back at the photo of Marlene laughing, her hand resting possessively on Bill's chest. The tears that had been threatening to fall evaporated. The heat in her chest cooled into something solid and sharp. Why should she cry? Crying was for women who had no options. Crying was for women who were victims. Bill had built his entire life, his career, and his ego on the foundation she had maintained. He had given her access to the cracks in the foundation, assuming she was too naive to notice them. He was sloppy. Narcissism had made him careless. Peggy picked up the power of attorney document. It was valid. It was comprehensive. It gave her unfettered access and decision-making power regarding all real property, financial assets, and banking institutions. He had handed her the keys to the kingdom because he was too busy chasing a skirt to manage his own empire. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile touched Peggy's lips. She stood up and gathered the photos, sliding them back into the envelope with steady hands. She wouldn't confront him tonight. She wouldn't scream or throw vases or beg him to explain. That was the old Peggy would do. The new Peggy was going to be exactly what he wanted, helpful. She was going to help him lose everything. She walked over to the calendar on the wall and circled the date of his next business trip with a red marker. She had 3 days before he left. 3 days to liquidate, transfer, and erase. She wasn't just going to leave him. She was going to evict him from his own life. The crying was over. The work was just beginning. The next morning, Peggy poured Bill's coffee with the steady hand of a surgeon, placing the cup on a coaster exactly 3 inches from his left hand, just the way he liked it. He didn't look up. He was thumbing through emails on his phone, a small, smug smile playing on his lips that Peggy now knew belonged to Marlene. The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasting espresso and the quiet, suffocating tension of a life built on lies. "I'll be late tonight," Bill said, finally taking a sip, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Merger details. Don't wait up." "Of course," Peggy said, her voice light and airy, the perfect pitch of the oblivious housewife. "I'll make sure the dry cleaning is picked up." She watched him leave, standing in the doorway as the heavy oak door clicked shut. The moment the lock engaged, the performance ended. Peggy's shoulders dropped, her spine straightened, and the mask of the doting wife dissolved into the cold resolve of an executioner. She didn't go to the dry cleaner. Instead, she went straight to Bill's home office, a room he had forbidden her from entering when he was working, claiming his genius required solitude. Now it was her command center. She sat at his mahogany desk, the leather chair swallowing her slight frame, and opened her laptop. Beside it, she placed the power of attorney document, the ink of his signature looking like a jagged scar across the bottom line. He had signed it to avoid the inconvenience of managing their estate while he was busy working. He called it an administrative necessity. Peggy called it the master key. First came the accounts. She logged into their primary joint holdings, the screen illuminating her face in the dim room. The numbers were staggering. Millions accumulated over 20 years of his cutthroat deals and her prudent management. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the heist. She wasn't stealing, she was reallocating. With a few keystrokes, she initiated a series of transfers. The destination wasn't a personal savings account where he could find it, but a newly formed LLC she had registered yesterday, Veritas Holdings. The name was her little inside joke, Truth. She watched the progress bars fill, pixel by pixel, draining the lifeblood of Bill's power. The checking account, the savings, the emergency fund, the investment portfolio. Each transfer complete notification felt like a physical weight lifting off her chest. She left exactly $500 in the joint checking account, enough for a tank of gas and a cheap motel room. She wasn't cruel, she was just thorough. Next was the house. This was the crown jewel of Bill's ego, the sprawling estate he used to impress clients and intimidate rivals. Peggy pulled up the county clerk's digital portal. The power of attorney gave her the explicit right to sell, transfer, or encumber real property. She scanned the document, uploaded the file, and executed a quitclaim deed transferring the property from William and Peggy Sterling to Veritas Holdings. It was a bold move, one that might take a few days to fully process in the county records, but legally, the ink was dry. The house he slept in, the roof over his head, the marble floors he loved to pace while dictating orders, none of it belonged to him anymore. He was a squatter in his own castle. The cars were easier. She found the titles in the safe, the combination to which was his birthday. Narcissism made him predictable. She signed them over to the holding company, stacking the papers neatly in a folder. His beloved Porsche, the symbol of his midlife crisis, was now technically a company car for a company he didn't own. By early afternoon, the sun was casting long shadows across the office floor. Peggy sat back, her hands trembling slightly. It was done. In the span of 6 hours, she had systematically dismantled the financial infrastructure of Bill's life. He was hollowed out, a paper tiger waiting for a strong wind. The front door opened downstairs. Bill was home early. Peggy's heart seized. She slammed the laptop shut and shoved the folders into the bottom drawer, smoothing her hair just as Bill's heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. "You're in here?" he asked, frowning. "I told you I don't like people messing with my desk." "I was just dusting, Bill," Peggy said, standing up and moving around the desk to kiss his cheek. She smelled it on him immediately, Marlene's perfume, vanilla and ambition. "You're home early. Did the merger go well?" "Better than expected," Bill grinned, walking past her to the window, looking out over the manicured lawn he thought he still owned. "In fact, I need you to pack a bag for me. The partners want to do a final review in Cabo this weekend. I leave tomorrow morning." Peggy watched him survey the property, the lord of the manor. A bubble of hysterical laughter threatened to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "Cabo," she repeated. "That sounds important." "It is critical," he said, turning to her with that patronizing look she had come to loathe. "So, pack the summer suits, and don't forget the sunscreen. I don't have time to do it myself." "I'll take care of everything," Peggy said softly. "Good girl." He patted her arm dismissively and walked out of the room, whistling. Peggy waited until his footsteps faded towards the master bedroom. She looked back at the desk where the laptop sat. He had asked her to pack, so she would pack. She would pack exactly what he deserved. She walked out of the office, leaving the ghost of his ownership behind her. Tonight, she would play the perfect wife one last time. She would cook his dinner, pour his wine, and listen to his lies about business trips and mergers. She would let him sleep in the bed that now belonged to Veritas Holdings. And tomorrow, when he walked out that door with his suitcase in hand, dragging his mistress and his arrogance along with him, he would have no idea that he was walking into a world where he had already ceased to exist. The Uber arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, its headlights cutting through the gray morning mist like predatory eyes. Bill was already at the door, his leather weekender bag slung over his shoulder, the expensive Italian one she had bought him for their 10th anniversary. He smelled of sandalwood and deception, a scent he wore heavily to mask the underlying odor of his own guilt. "Don't worry about the garden landscapers," he said, checking his watch, his impatience vibrating off him in waves. "I told them to come next week. You just focus on whatever it is you do." "I will," Peggy said, standing in her silk robe, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She leaned in to kiss his cheek, a cold, dry peck that he didn't even register. "Have a safe flight. I hope the merger is worth it." "It always is," he replied, already turning away. He didn't look back. He marched down the driveway, climbed into the black sedan, and disappeared around the bend of the neighborhood, off to meet Marlene at the airport for a weekend of sun, tequila, and the illusion of invincibility. The moment the taillights vanished, Peggy didn't collapse. She didn't sigh. She locked the front door and turned around to face the foyer. The house was silent, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a blank canvas. She had exactly 48 hours before he returned, but she wouldn't need that long. She had been planning this exodus in her head for months. Physically executing it was just a matter of logistics. She moved with the efficiency of a crime scene cleaner. She went upstairs to the master bedroom, the site of so many lonely nights and one-sided conversations. She pulled 3 large suitcases from the back of a walk-in closet, luggage she had purchased with cash 2 towns over. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't pack the designer dresses Bill liked her to wear to galas, the ones that were too tight and cut too low, making her feel like a show pony. She left those hanging like colorful ghosts in the wardrobe. Instead, she packed the things that proved she existed: her birth certificate, her passport, the small box of jewelry her grandmother had left her, modest pieces that Bill had always sneered at because they weren't flashy enough to impress his partners. She took the hard drive from her personal laptop, the one containing her digital journals and the backups of the evidence she had gathered against him. She took the apology diamonds, the tennis bracelet from the 2018 affair, the sapphire earrings from the missed birthday in 2021. Those weren't sentimental, they were liquidity. She moved room to room, stripping the house of her essence. The photos on the mantle, she removed the ones of her parents and herself, leaving only the pictures of Bill. Let him be surrounded by his own reflection. It was what he loved most, after all. She cleared her toiletries from the bathroom counter, wiping the marble down until it gleamed, cold and sterile. By noon, the house felt different. It was no longer a home, it was a stage set after the actors had quit. It retained the furniture, the expensive art, and the heavy drapery, but it lacked the warmth of habitation. It echoed. She walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where she kept the spare keys. She took the brass key to the front door, the heavy, ceremonial one he insisted they use because the electronic lock looked cheap. She held it in her palm, feeling the cold metal bite into her skin. It was the key to a prison she had built for herself, and now she was handing it back to the warden. Peggy returned to the master bedroom one last time. The bed was made with military precision, the Egyptian cotton sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a coin. She reached into her purse and pulled out the red envelope. It was vibrant, the color of a warning sign, clashing violently with the muted grays and creams of the room's decor. She placed it squarely in the center of the bed. It was impossible to miss. It was a magnet for the eye. Next to the envelope, she placed the brass key. She stood at the foot of the bed and surveyed her work. The room looked like a hotel suite, expensive, impersonal, and temporary. There was no trace of the woman who had slept there for 2 decades. No book on the nightstand, no slippers by the rug, no scent of her lavender lotion in the air. She had successfully erased herself. She carried her suitcases down the stairs, the wheels humming softly on the hardwood. Her car, a sensible sedan that she had transferred to Veritas Holdings yesterday, was waiting in the garage. She loaded the trunk. The finality of the sound of the latch clicking shut sent a thrill of electricity down her spine. She backed out of the garage, hitting the remote to lower the door. As the darkness swallowed the interior of the house, sealing the trap shut, Peggy picked up her burner phone. She had one last move to make. Bill needed to feel safe. He needed to believe that he was the one in control, that the house was his playground to defile. She typed the text message slowly, savoring every word. "Hey honey, my sister is having a crisis with the kids. I'm driving up to stay with her for the week to help out. Didn't want to bother you during the merger. The house is all yours when you get back. Love, Peg." She hit send. She watched the delivered status appear. He wouldn't question it. He would be relieved. He would read "the house is all yours" and think it was an invitation to bring Marlene home, to sleep in their bed, to live the double life he thought he was entitled to. He wouldn't realize it until it was too late that "the house is all yours" was not an invitation. It was a sentence. Peggy put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, not checking the rearview mirror. The sprawling estate shrank in the distance, a monument to a dead marriage. The road ahead was open, leading towards the coast, towards the small cottage she had rented under her maiden name, and towards a silence that would finally belong to her. The red envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to be. It sat in Bill's palm like a lead weight, the only burst of color in a room that had been stripped down to a terrifying shade of sterile gray. Beside him, Marlene was still spinning in circles, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she admired the vaulted ceilings, oblivious to the fact that the atmosphere had shifted from celebration to funeral in the span of 3 seconds. "It's huge, Bill," she cooed, running a manicured hand over the bare dresser where Peggy's jewelry box used to sit. "I can't believe you lived here with her for 20 years. It's too nice for someone so plain." Bill didn't answer. His throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. He looked at the bed, stripped of its duvet, leaving only the stark white mattress protector exposed. It looked like an operating table. With trembling fingers, he broke the wax seal of the envelope. There was no greeting, no "Dear Bill," no "To my husband," just Peggy's handwriting, elegant and sharp, marching across the cream stationery with the precision of a soldier. "You always thought I stayed because I was weak. You thought I looked the other way because I was blind. But I didn't stay because I was afraid of losing you, Bill. I stayed until I was finished with you." Bill read the line twice, his brain struggling to reconcile the words with the woman he thought he knew. Peggy, the woman who packed his vitamins, who organized his tax receipts, who smiled vacantly at his jokes, didn't write like this. This was the voice of a stranger. "I've cleaned the house, Bill. It's all yours now. Every empty room is a reflection of what you actually have left. But I did leave you one housewarming gift. Open the master closet. The note ended there. No signature, just a final command. What is it? Marlene asked, finally noticing his pallor. She plucked the letter from his numb fingers, her eyes scanning the page. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Finished with you? God, she's so dramatic. She's probably hiding at her sister's, waiting for you to call and beg. Marlene tossed the letter onto the mattress like it was trash. Forget her. Show me the closet. You said it was big enough for all my shoes. Bill moved without feeling his legs. He walked toward the double doors of the walk-in closet, a space he had customized with cedar shelving and recessed lighting. He reached for the handles, his palms slick with sweat. A primal instinct deep in his lizard brain screamed at him not to open it. It warned him that whatever was behind those doors was going to hurt more than the empty walls. He threw the doors open. Marlene gasped, but it wasn't a sound of delight. It was a sound of horror. The closet was empty of clothes. The racks were bare, the shelves were stripped, but the walls, the back wall, the side panels, even the back of the doors were covered. They were wallpapered, edge to edge, floor to ceiling, with photographs. Hundreds of them. Bill staggered back, his vision swimming. It wasn't a collage, it was a timeline. It was a forensic documentation of his betrayal. There, at eye level, was a photo of him and Marlene in Cabo, taken just 3 days ago. They were sitting at the swim-up bar, his hand resting on her thigh. He remembered that moment. He remembered laughing, feeling like a king who outsmarted the world. Next to it was a grainy shot of them in the parking lot of the Ritz-Carlton from 6 months ago. Below that, a picture of them arguing outside Marlene's apartment complex at 2 a.m. "Who took these?" Marlene whispered, her voice trembling. She stepped back, clutching her purse to her chest as if the photos could bite her. "Bill, who took these?" Bill walked closer, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The detail was meticulous. Underneath each photo, written in black marker on the white wall paint, were dates and timestamps. October 14th, 11:42 p.m., the late board meeting. November 3rd, 1:15 p.m., the client lunch. December 25th, 10 a.m., the emergency call. She knew. She knew the whole time. Bill croaked, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. She knew the whole time. "This is sick," Marlene hissed, backing out of the closet. "She's a stalker. Bill, look at this one." She pointed a shaking finger at a photo near the floor. It was taken through the window of this very bedroom. It showed Bill packing his bag for Cabo, oblivious, while Peggy's reflection was visible in the mirror behind him, watching him with a cold, dead stare. Bill spun around, scanning the timeline. It went back months, years even. There were photos of women he had forgotten, flings that meant nothing, indiscretions he thought were buried in the past. Peggy had cataloged them all. She hadn't just been his wife, she had been his archivist. "Why?" Bill whispered to the empty room. "Why wait?" Then he saw it. In the center of the back wall, pinned squarely in the middle of the shrine to his infidelity, was a small shelf that hadn't been there before. Sitting on it was a small black box. He reached out, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a silver USB drive. Underneath it was a small handwritten tag, "The Insurance." "What is that?" Marlene asked, her voice shrill with panic. "Bill, we need to leave. This place is creepy. She's crazy. Let's just go to a hotel." Bill stared at the USB drive. A cold dread, colder than the silence of the house, washed over him. He thought about the power of attorney. He thought about the administrative documents she handled. He thought about the complex tax shelters and the creative accounting he used to hide his assets, accounts Peggy had access to. "She's not crazy, Bill," he whispered, clutching the drive so hard the edges bit into his palm. He looked at the wall of photos, at the thousands of eyes staring back at him, his own eyes blinded by arrogance. "She's not crazy, Marlene. She's thorough." He turned and ran out of the closet, past the bewildered mistress, past the red envelope on the bed, and sprinted towards his office. He needed a computer. He needed to know what was on that drive. Because if the closet was the gift, the drive was the bomb, and he had a terrible sinking feeling that the fuse had already been lit. Bill slammed the office door open so hard the handle punched a hole in the drywall, a stark imperfection in the otherwise pristine room. He didn't care. He practically vaulted over the mahogany desk, the throne from which he had commanded his corporate empire, and scrambled to wake his computer. Marlene stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, hugging herself as if the temperature in the house had dropped 20 degrees. She looked small now, stripped of the bravado she had worn in the foyer. The house wasn't a prize anymore, it was a crime scene, and she was beginning to realize she was standing in the chalk outline. "Bill, you're scaring me," she said, her voice thin. "Just throw it away. Whatever is on there, just destroy it." "I can't just throw it away, Marlene," Bill snapped, his fingers fumbling as he jammed the silver USB drive into the port. "If she knows about us, that's a divorce case. If she knows about the other things, that's a federal indictment." The screen flickered to life. The drive mounted instantly, an icon appearing on the desktop titled simply, "The Truth." Bill clicked it. There were no folders, no chaotic scattering of files, just a single video file named "Play Me, William." He hit the spacebar. The video player expanded to full screen. The image was high definition, steady, and terrifyingly familiar. It was filmed in this very room. Peggy was sitting in his chair, wearing a navy blazer he had never seen before. Her hair was blown out, her makeup sharp and professional. She didn't look like the woman who baked casseroles and waited by the window. She looked like a CEO announcing a hostile takeover. "Hello, Bill," the video Peggy said. Her voice was calm, modulated, devoid of the trembling sadness she had always associated with her. "If you're watching this, it means two things have happened. One, you've returned from your trip with Marlene, and two, you found the closet." In the office, the real Bill froze. Marlene audibly gasped behind him. "You brought her into our home," video Peggy continued, leaning forward slightly, her eyes locking with the camera lens as if she could see right through the screen and into Bill's sweating soul. "You violated the sanctuary, and because you broke the rules of our marriage, I have decided to dissolve the rules of your protection." On the screen, the image cut away from Peggy's face to a screen recording. It was a digital spreadsheet, one Bill recognized instantly. It was the Project Horizon ledger, the shadow book he used to funnel kickbacks from construction vendors into offshore accounts in the Caymans. "You always told me not to worry my pretty little head about the finances," video Peggy's voiceover narrated, cool and clinical. "You said you wouldn't understand the complexities of your business, but you forgot something, Bill. I have a master's in accounting. I just never used it because you preferred a housekeeper." The cursor on the screen highlighted a series of transactions. "Here we have the $50,000 wire transfer from Consulting Services LLC. That's the shell company you set up in Marlene's name, isn't it?" In the office, Bill spun around to look at Marlene. She went pale. I just signed what you told me to sign," she stammered, backing away. "You said it was for tax benefits." "Shut up," Bill hissed, turning back to the screen. "And here," Peggy continued, the visual shifting to scanned PDFs of invoices, "are the inflated material costs for the Midtown project. You were skimming 15% off the top. That's embezzlement, Bill. And since you used the company mail server to approve these, it's also wire fraud." The video cut back to Peggy in the chair. She held up a stack of papers. "I have the emails, I have the bank statements, I have the audio recording of you and Nicholas discussing how to hide the assets from the IRS during the audit last year. You remember that conversation? You took it on speakerphone in the kitchen while I was making risotto. You thought I was listening to the stove. I was recording you on my iPhone." Bill felt the blood drain from his extremities. His hands resting on the desk were numb. This wasn't just a breakup letter. This was a dossier. It was a meticulously curated, evidence-backed roadmap to prison. "You treated me like furniture, Bill," Peggy said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its professional veneer for just a second to reveal a core of hardened steel. "You thought I was deaf and blind because I was quiet, but I saw everything. I saw you steal from your partners, I saw you cheat on your taxes, and I saw you humiliate me with a woman younger than you could be your daughter." She paused, and a small, terrifying smile touched her lips. "You're probably wondering what I'm going to do with this," she said. "You're probably thinking you can call Nicholas, offer me a settlement, buy my silence. But that's the thing about insurance, Bill. You only cash it in after the accident has already happened." Bill's breath hitched. I didn't leave this drive here to blackmail you, Peggy said softly. I left it here to explain why the FBI is going to be knocking on your door. I mailed a copy of this drive to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the IRS, and the District Attorney's Office 3 days ago. By the time you're watching this, the investigation has already begun. The screen cut to black. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy enough to crush bone. Bill stared at the dark screen, his reflection staring back at him, a man who'd walked into the house a king and now was a fugitive. She sent it? Marlene whispered. Her voice rose to a shriek. She sent it to the FBI? Bill, my name is on those shell companies. You said I was a silent partner. You said it was legal. I can fix this, Bill muttered, though he sounded like a man trying to stop a tidal wave with a spoon. He stood up, his legs wobbling. I need to call Nicholas. I need to... She's bluffing. She wouldn't blow up her own life just to get to me. She already left, Marlene screamed, grabbing his arm and digging her nails into his expensive suit jacket. She liquidated the accounts, Bill. She doesn't have a life here to blow up. She took the money and left us with the handcuffs. Bill shoved her off. Get away from me. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, his thumb shaking so hard he missed the unlock code twice. He needed Nicholas. He needed a fixer. He needed to wake up from this nightmare where his quiet, boring wife had turned into a corporate assassin. He finally dialed Nicholas's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Pick up, damn you, Bill cursed. Finally, the line connected. Nicholas, thank God. Listen, you need to get over here. Peggy has gone insane. She's fabricated some evidence. She's trying to blackmail me. She says she sent things to the SEC. Bill, Nicholas's voice cut through the panic, ice cold and distant. I can't talk to you. Bill froze. What? I've been contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am currently negotiating my own immunity in exchange for cooperation. As of this moment, I am no longer your counsel. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. Bill lowered the phone slowly. The dial tone buzzed in the empty room like a flat line. He looked at Marlene, who was backing towards the door, her eyes wide with the realization that the luxury ride was over and the crash was beginning. The USB drive sat in the computer, its little blue light blinking rhythmically, mocking him. It wasn't just insurance, it was a receipt for a life he'd spent 20 years stealing, and Peggy had finally come to collect. The dial tone from Nicholas's disconnected call hummed in Bill's ear like a flatline, a monotonous drone signaling the death of his legal protection. He lowered the phone slowly, his hand slick with sweat, leaving a smudge on the screen. The office, usually a bastion of cool, conditioned air, felt stiflingly hot. What did he mean, immunity? Marlene's voice was high and brittle, snapping Bill out of his trance. She was standing by the door, her knuckles white as she clutched her Prada bag, her eyes darting between Bill and the terrifying USB drive still blinking in the computer. Bill, if your lawyer is flipping, what does that mean for me? You said I was protected. Quiet, Bill roared, the sound tearing out of his throat. He didn't have time to manage her panic. He was barely managing his own. He needed liquidity. If Nicholas was out, he needed a new lawyer, the kind that cost $1,000 an hour and required a retainer in cash. He needed to move the money before the government freeze that Peggy had promised, or the freeze Nicholas had hinted at, locked him out completely. He jobbed his finger onto the contacts list and dialed the private line of his relationship manager at the bank, a man named Henderson, who he had taken golfing at Augusta just last month. Henderson would fix this. Henderson knew how the game was played. The line rang twice. William Sterling, Henderson's voice answered. It wasn't the warm, deferential tone Bill was used to. It was stiff, formal. Henderson, listen to me, Bill said, rushing the words, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I need to execute a wire transfer immediately. The Cayman Holdings. I want to move the entire balance of the joint investment account and a liquid savings to the offshore shell. Now, tonight. There was a pause on the other end, a silence so thick Bill could hear the hum of the bank's server room in the background. I can't do that, Mr. Sterling, Henderson said. Don't give me that compliance crap, Arthur, Bill snapped, leaning over the desk, sweat dripping onto the mahogany. I'm the primary account holder. I'm authorizing the transfer. Override the protocol. It's not a protocol issue, Bill, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if he were afraid of being overheard. The accounts are empty. Bill froze. The phone pressed against his ear felt hot. What? Mrs. Sterling came in yesterday morning. She had the power of attorney document you signed last year, the notarized one. It granted her full withdrawal rights. That was for household expenses, Bill screamed, slamming his fist onto the desk. She can't just drain the portfolio. The document was unlimited, Bill. She liquidated the securities, she closed the savings, she transferred the balances to a corporate entity called Veritas Holdings. The funds have cleared. They're gone. Bill felt the room tilt. 20 years of bonuses, the rainy day fund, the escape hatch money. All of it dissolved into the ether by the woman he had asked to pack his sunscreen. Okay, Bill stammered, his mind racing, looking for a foothold on a crumbling cliff. Okay, fine. What about the business operating account, the Project Horizon funds? I can access those as the CEO. Bill, Bell sighed, a sound of genuine pity that enraged Bill more than the refusal. We received a freeze order from the Department of Justice 2 hours ago. The corporate accounts are locked pending an investigation into wire fraud and money laundering. Even if I wanted to help you, the system won't let me touch a dime. Your credit cards have been suspended, your lines of credit are frozen. Bill dropped into his leather chair, the phone slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the desk. He stared at the wall of photos Marlene had told him about, imagining Peggy's eyes watching him right now. She hadn't just checkmated him, she had flipped the board and set the table on fire. Bill? Marlene stepped closer, her voice losing its edge of panic and replaced by a cold, dawning realization. What did he say? Where's the money? Bill looked up at her. The green dress he had bought her looked garish now, a costume for a play that had been canceled. It's gone, he whispered. She took the personal cash. The feds froze the business accounts. So you have nothing? Marlene asked. She didn't sound sad. She sounded like she was calculating the exchange rate of her time. I have this house, Bill muttered, grasping at the last straw of his identity. I built this house. It's worth $4 million. I can take out a bridge loan against the equity. I can hire a defense team. He grabbed the mouse and minimized the terrifying video of Peggy, opening the county property assessor's portal. He typed in his address with shaking fingers. 1402 Oakwood Drive. The page loaded. Owner of record, Veritas Holdings, LLC. Transfer date, yesterday. Transaction type, quick claim deed. Bill stared at the screen. The air left his lungs. He wasn't the owner. He was a trespasser. Peggy had used the same power of attorney to sign the house over to her shell company. She owned the roof over his head. She owned the floor he was standing on. She took the house, Bill said, his voice hollow. She transferred the deed. Marlene let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She looked around the office, her eyes landing on the expensive humidor, the golf trophies, the trappings of wealth that no longer existed. Then she looked at Bill. For months, she had looked at him like a god who could grant her wishes. Now, she looked at him like a stain on the carpet. You're broke, she stated flatly. You're broke, you're about to be indicted, and you're squatting in your ex-wife's house. Marlene, baby, we can figure this out, Bill pleaded, standing up and reaching for her. I still have contacts. I can... Don't touch me, she hissed, stepping back, her face twisting in disgust. You told me you were a genius. You told me she was stupid. You brought me here to gloat, and you didn't even know she had gutted you like a fish. I did this for us, Bill shouted, his humiliation turning into rage. I took these risks to buy you that jewelry, to pay for that apartment. And who's going to pay for it next month, Bill? The feds? You're a sinking ship, and I'm not drowning for a man who couldn't even keep his checkbook safe from his boring wife. She turned on her heel and marched out of the office. Marlene, Hallen, you can't leave. We're in this together. She didn't stop. She grabbed her purse from the foyer table and yanked the front door open. There is no us, Bill, she threw over her shoulder. I was an investment, and you just crashed. The heavy oak door slammed shut, leaving Bill alone in the silence. He stood in the center of the foyer, the grand chandelier hanging above him like a sword of Damocles. He had no money, he had no lawyer, he had no woman, and somewhere in the distance, growing louder with every second, he could hear the distinct wail of sirens approaching the gates of Veritas Holdings. The silence following the slam of the heavy oak door lasted less than 10 seconds. It was broken not by the sirens, which were still a faint wail in the distance, but by the frantic, angry rattling of the door handle. The door flew open again, and Marlene marched back into the foyer, her face flushed a blotchy, terrified red, her chest heaving beneath the emerald silk of her dress. "The gate," she spat, throwing her purse onto the marble floor. "The damn gate won't open, Bill. I punched in the code 3 times. It's dead. She changed it. She locked us in." Bill stood frozen under the chandelier, the absurdity of the moment washing over him. Of course Peggy had changed the gate code. She hadn't just evicted him. She had trapped him in a cage so the zookeepers could come and collect him. It's probably just a system glitch," Bill muttered, though he knew it wasn't. "I can override it from the panel in the garage." "You can't override anything," Marlene screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, stripping away the last veneer of the sophisticated, supportive partner she had played for months. "You don't own the panel. You don't own the house. You're just a squatter with a warrant." She paced the foyer like a caged animal, her heels clicking a sharp, frantic rhythm. Then she stopped, her eyes widening as a new, colder realization took hold. She looked at Bill, really looked at him, not as her ticket to the high life, but as an anchor dragging her down into the abyss of federal prison. "My name," she whispered, her hands shaking as she reached into her purse. "My name is on the Consulting Services LLC documents. You said I was a silent partner. You said it was for tax efficiency. But if that money was stolen, if it was laundered..." She fumbled with her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "Marlene, stop," Bill said, stepping toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture that felt pathetic even to him. "You can't override anything. But we can present a united front. We can say Peggy forged the signatures. We can say..." "There is no we," she snapped. She held the phone up, the camera lens pointed squarely at his face. The red record dot pulsed on the screen. "Say it, Bill. Say right now that I didn't know." Bill recoiled as if she had pulled a gun. "Put that away." "Say it," she shrieked, moving closer, thrusting the phone into his personal space. "Tell the camera that you set up the shell company. Tell them that you forged my signature. I am not going to jail because you got greedy. I have a life, Bill. I have a future." "You have a future because of me," Bill roared, his temper snapping. He lunged for the phone, swiping at her hand. Marlene stumbled back, but she didn't drop it. She kept the lens trained on him, capturing every second of his unraveling. "You used me," she yelled, backing toward the staircase. "You told me Peggy was a bore. You told me she was cold, but she wasn't cold, was she? She was smart. She was watching you play house with me while she was sharpening the knife. And you arrogantly paraded me around town like a trophy, making sure she had plenty of evidence to gut us both." "I gave you everything," Bill shouted, his voice cracking. "The apartment, the car, the jewelry. You didn't care where the money came from when you were wearing it." "That was compensation," Marlene spat, her face twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. "Compensation for listening to you whine about your wife. Compensation for pretending you were interesting. But the checks bounced, Bill. The ride is over." She was still recording. The red light blinked, a digital witness to his humiliation. Bill stared at her, and for the first time, the fog of his own narcissism lifted enough for him to see the truth. Marlene didn't love him. She didn't even like him. She was a mercenary who had bet on the wrong horse, and now she was trying to cut her losses by selling him to the glue factory. "You're trying to set me up," Bill said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Just like her, you're all the same. I'm surviving, unlike you. You're already dead. You just haven't fallen over yet." She lowered the phone slightly, checking the screen to ensure the footage was saved. "I'm going to send this to my lawyer," she said, topping furiously, "and then I'm going to climb over that gate in my Louboutins if I have to, and when the police get here, I'm going to tell them exactly where to find the rest of the files." Bill watched her turn away, watched her walk toward the heavy oak door with the determination of a rat fleeing a sinking ship. He stood alone in the center of the grand space feeling vast and cold. He looked around at the empty walls where his art collection used to hang. The Warhols, the Herrings, the trophies of his success. They were gone. The money was gone. His reputation was gone. And now, even the illusion of adoration was gone. He had blown up his life for a woman who was currently recording a confession to save her own skin. He realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that he was completely, utterly isolated. There was no one coming to save him. There was no one to call. Even the silence of the house seemed to be rejecting him, pushing him out, making space for the justice that was screaming up the driveway. He sank down onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, putting his head in his hands. The sirens were loud now. They were at the gate. He heard the screech of tires, the slam of car doors, and the distant, distorted sound of a megaphone demanding entry. Marlene was pounding on the front door, screaming for the officers to let her out. Bill didn't move. He just sat in the wreckage of his own ego, waiting for the inevitable impact. Peggy had been right. She hadn't just left him. She had finished him. The pounding on the front door was rhythmic, heavy, and authoritative. A sound that didn't ask for permission but demanded submission. Marlene, who had been clawing at the lock only moments before, now recoiled as if the wood had turned red hot. She stumbled back toward the staircase where Bill sat, her face a mask of smeared mascara and terror. The heavy oak shuddered under the force of the blows, and then a voice, amplified and distorted, cut through the wood. "Federal agents, open the door!" Bill didn't stand up immediately. He felt a strange, detached heaviness in his limbs, as if gravity had doubled inside the foyer. He watched Marlene scramble sideways, her hands raised in a pathetic surrender before anyone had even entered. With a sigh that sounded like the last breath of his former life, Bill pushed himself off the step. He walked across the marble floor, his footsteps heavy and slow, and unlocked the deadbolt. He didn't even have to turn the handle. The door was shoved open from the outside, and the foyer was instantly flooded with blue windbreakers. "William Sterling?" The lead agent didn't wait for an answer. He was a tall man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen 1,000 men like Bill, men who thought their tailored suits were armor against consequences. "I'm Special Agent Miller, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest and a search warrant for this property." "This is a mistake," Bill said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was the standard line, the reflex of the guilty, and he saw the agent's mouth twitch with a microscopic hint of boredom. "Save it for counsel," Miller said, stepping into the house. Behind him, a team of agents began to fan out, their boots loud and intrusive on the delicate stone floors. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, heading straight for the office, the library, and the garage. Marlene let out a high, keening wail. "I'm not involved. I'm just a consultant. I didn't know anything." She lunged toward Miller, grabbing his sleeve. "He lied to me. He told me the accounts were legal. I want to turn state's witness." Miller didn't look at her. He gestured to a female agent near the door. "Detain Miss O'Coffer. We have a separate warrant for her regarding the Shell Corporation Consulting Services LLC. Read her rights." "No!" Marlene screamed as the agent took her arm. "Bill, tell them! Tell them I didn't know!" Bill watched them lead her out, her heels dragging on the threshold, her green dress a bright stain against the dark uniforms. He felt nothing. No pity, no anger. She was just another asset that had been seized. "Living room," Miller commanded, steering Bill into the formal sitting area, a room that Peggy had decorated in soft creams and blues, a room that was meant for tea and conversation, not handcuffs and indictments. Bill sat on the edge of the sofa. "My lawyer," he started, then stopped. He remembered the dial tone. "I need a public defender." Miller pulled a chair opposite him and sat down, opening a thin file folder. "You'll get your phone call, Mr. Sterling, but right now we're just executing the search. Though to be honest, the search is mostly a formality." Bill looked up, his eyes stinging. "What do you mean?" "Usually, in cases like this, wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, we have to dig. We have to subpoena servers, reconstruct shredded documents, chase down Cayman bankers. It takes months, sometimes years." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "But we don't have to do that with you, Bill, because your wife did it for us." "The drive?" Bill whispered. "She left a USB drive." Miller shook his head slightly. "The drive was just the table of contents, Bill. The drive was her way of being polite. I'm talking about the hard evidence." The agent pulled a photograph from the file and slid it across the coffee table. Bill stared at it. It was a grainy surveillance photo inside a bank vault. In the image, Peggy was standing at a table, signing a logbook. Beside her was a large metal safe deposit box. "Yesterday morning at 9 a.m., Mrs. Peggy Sterling walked into the First National Bank downtown. She accessed a joint safe deposit box, box 404. You opened it with her 15 years ago, do you remember?" Bill blinked. He vaguely remembered a small box for passports, birth certificates. He hadn't thought about it in a decade. It just has family papers." "No, Bill," Miller corrected him softly. "That's what you thought it had. But for the last 5 years, every time Mrs. Sterling found a falsified invoice or a printout of an offshore transfer or a receipt for diamond jewelry bought with company funds, she didn't shred it. She didn't put it in the trash where you might find it. She drove to the bank. She put it in the box." Bill felt the room spinning. He gripped the edge of the sofa cushion. She had been hoarding the evidence. She had been building a case against him, brick by brick, receipt by receipt, locking it away in steel while he slept beside her. "She voluntarily surrendered the contents of the box yesterday afternoon to our field office," Miller said, tapping the photo. "We have the originals, Bill, not copies. We have the ink signatures on the fraudulent construction contracts. We have the handwritten ledgers you thought were destroyed. We have the Project Horizon breakdown in your own handwriting." "She can't do that," Bill stammered, his voice sounding like a child's. "Spousal privilege. She can't testify." "She doesn't have to testify," Miller said, a look of genuine pity crossing his face for the first time. "The documents speak for themselves, and since she was a joint owner of the box, she had every legal right to hand it over. She waived her privilege. She gave us the keys to the kingdom, and she locked you in the dungeon." Bill looked around the room, Peggy's room. He realized now that the neatness, the order, the silence he had always attributed to her being boring was actually the discipline of a spy. She hadn't been blind. She had been undercover. "She planned this," Bill whispered, "for years." "She wanted to be thorough," Miller said, standing up. He reached for the handcuffs at his belt. "Mr. Sterling, stand up and place her hands behind your back." Bill stood. The metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, cold and final. As Miller led him toward the front door, Bill looked back one last time at the empty house. He saw the red envelope still sitting on the foyer table where he had dropped it. He realized then that Peggy hadn't just taken his money or his freedom, she had taken his narrative. He wasn't the powerful CEO who had outgrown his wife. He was the fool who had handed the executioner her axe. They walked out into the cool evening air. The flashing lights of the cruisers bounced off the neighbors' windows, the same neighbors Bill had tried so hard to impress. He was shoved into the back of a black SUV. As the car pulled away, Bill looked toward the ocean, miles away, wondering if she was watching the news, wondering if she was smiling. But deep down, he knew she wasn't. She was probably just sleeping soundly for the first time in 20 years. The sliding glass doors of the federal courthouse didn't open with a welcoming swoosh. They ground open with a mechanical reluctance, spitting Bill Sterling out onto the concrete steps like a seed the system had chewed up and decided wasn't worth swallowing yet. It had been 48 hours since the raid. 48 hours of fluorescent lights, cold metal benches, and the humiliation of having his shoelaces removed so he wouldn't hang himself. He was out on bail, posted by a distant cousin who had demanded the title to Bill's Porsche as collateral, unaware that the car already belonged to Veritas Holdings. Bill didn't have the heart or the energy to tell him. He stood on the sidewalk, blinking against the harsh glare of the midday sun. He expected a throng of reporters, cameras, microphones shoved in his face. He had braced himself for the infamy. But there was no one, just a few pigeons pecking at a discarded crust of bread and a courier bike weaving through traffic. The silence was worse than the shouting. It meant he wasn't a tragedy, he was a footnote. He was just another white-collar criminal who had gotten sloppy, a cliché in a wrinkled Italian suit that now hung loosely on his frame. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, which had been returned to him in a plastic bag along with his wallet and belt. The battery was in the red. He turned it on, his thumb hovering over the screen. There were dozens of missed calls, but not from friends. They were from creditors, from reporters looking for a quote, from Marlene's lawyer threatening a countersuit. There was nothing from his partners, nothing from the club. The silence from his former life was absolute. He had been excommunicated from the Church of Success. He hailed a cab, not knowing where to tell the driver to go. He couldn't go home, the locks were changed and the gate was sealed. He couldn't go to the Ritz, his credit cards were dead plastic. "Just drive," he muttered to the driver. "Head toward the Motel 6 by the airport." As the city blurred past the window, Bill looked down at his phone again. He opened his messages and typed the only name that mattered, Peggy. His fingers trembled. What could he say? I'm sorry? Too small. You ruined me? Too true. I need you? Too pathetic. He typed, I'm out. I have nothing. You won. Please, Peg. Just tell me why you didn't just leave. Why did you have to burn it all down? He hit send. He stared at the screen, watching the little bubble, praying for the 3 dots that would indicate she was typing, that she was still engaging, that she still cared enough to hate him. 300 miles away, the air tasted of salt and wild sage. Peggy sat on the weathered wooden deck of a small shingled cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. The roar of the ocean was a constant, soothing thrum, a stark contrast to the stifling silence of the mansion she had left behind. Here, the silence was alive. It was filled with the cry of gulls and the rustle of wind through the dune grass. She held a ceramic mug of tea in her hands, the warmth seeping into her fingers. She was wearing a loose linen cardigan and jeans, clothes Bill would have hated because they weren't elegant. She hadn't worn makeup in 3 days. When she looked in the mirror above the small bathroom sink, she didn't see the tired, anxious woman who used to measure her worth by her husband's mood. She saw someone she was just beginning to remember. Her phone, resting on the railing of the deck, buzzed, a single, short vibration. Peggy didn't jump. She didn't rush to check it. She took another sip of tea, watching a pelican dive into the sleek gray water. Slowly, she reached out and picked up the device. The name Bill flashed on the screen. She read the message preview. I'm out. I have nothing. You won. She didn't feel a spike of adrenaline. She didn't feel a surge of vindictive glee. She just felt light. The words on the screen felt like they were coming from a different planet, a transmission from a life she had already shed like a dead skin. He asked why she hadn't just left. He still didn't understand. If she had just left, she would have been a victim. She would have been the poor, discarded wife scraping by on alimony he would inevitably hide. By burning it down, she hadn't just punished him, she had freed herself. She had ensured that when she walked away, she wasn't looking behind her to see if the other shoe would drop. She had taken the shoes. She looked at the ocean again, vast and indifferent. She thought about typing a reply. She thought about telling him that she burned it down because fire is cleansing. She thought about telling him that she didn't want his apology, she wanted his consequences. But then she realized that replying would be engaging. It would be stepping back into the cage, even just for a second, to explain the lock to the prisoner. Bill Sterling was no longer her problem. He was the government's problem. He was Marlene's problem. He was his own problem. Peggy tapped the screen once. Delete conversation. Then, with a few more taps, she opened the settings and blocked the number. She set the phone back down on the railing, screen down. She stood up and walked to the edge of the deck, breathing in the cold, clean air. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. It was going to be a cold night, but the cottage had a wood stove and she had plenty of wood. She would build a fire tonight. not to burn anything down, but just to keep herself warm. Peggy smiled, a genuine private smile that belonged to no one but herself. Then she turned her back on the phone and went inside, sliding the glass door shut against the noise of the world.